Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our closing session of this Global Fleet Conference 2021. And it promises to be a great session, a session with a bang, as we were able to bring together some of the brightest minds of our corporate fleet industry. Our three panel members will reflect on the topics we discussed throughout the day. May I introduce Ming, Nestlé Regional Procurement Manager, Car Fleet Zone, Asia, Oceania, and Africa. Andy Leeden, Global Director, Fleet and Mobility at AstraZeneca and Green Fleet Manager of the Year 2019 and International Fleet Manager of the Year 2017. And finally, Tania Mijas, Senior Regional Category Lead, Travel, Congresses, Meetings, Events, and Fleet for the Americas at Genentech Hoffmann Roche, and she was elected the very first Fleet LatAm Manager of the Year, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel members. It's great that we can be together. We are going to discuss several topics, but first of all, I would like to start just with a quick one. Can you share with us how many vehicles you manage across the globe and for how many vehicles you are responsible? And I would like to start with Tania.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in this Global Fleet Executive Network. So at Genentech Hoffmann Roche, we have 14,000 cars around the globe, distributed in 90 countries, 160 sites. I am responsible for Americas region. So Americas region, we have around 6,000 cars.
Perfect. Andy, you are the Global Director, Fleet and Mobility at AstraZeneca. How many vehicles do you manage at the moment?
Stephen, well, we manage around 17,000 cars across 60 countries, and being global, unfortunately, they're all my responsibility.
Okay, perfect. And Ming, you are based in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Can you share with us how many vehicles you have at Nestlé and how many vehicles you manage?
Sure. So for Nestlé specifically, it ranges between 22 to 23,000 vehicles on a global basis, plus minus depending on the cycles. And for Asia, Oceania, and Africa specifically, it's just over 5,000 vehicles.
Okay, Ming, I would like to stay with you. You are based in APAC. For many fleet managers, APAC seems to be the most complex, the most challenging region to include in a global strategy. Based on your experience, how do you or how should fleet managers tackle APAC when they have a global fleet responsibility?
Yeah, so essentially, so APAC, I would say, relatively complex, and one reason why is because we don't have many global suppliers over here. The supply landscape is quite fragmented. There are many local players, and what you would notice is that they don't adhere to what we would think are global best practices. So one of the advice which I would actually give is when we adopt a strategy globally, is to essentially bring the best global practices to the market. So for example, let's say if you are looking at leasing, so say that you want to have leasing with global suppliers and you want to ensure that they are 5-star rated. One thing to always do is to ensure that you try to make it also a little bit more local in nature. So try to be flexible and adapt to the specific needs of the market, because that's very, very critical in regards to being successful in Asia when you're trying to approve a global strategy.
Tania, you are responsible for the Americas, that is North America, but also Latin America or South America. What Ming just described for APAC, is that also the case for Latin America, or do you see that quite differently?
I think that it's a little bit similar. You know, when you handle Latin America, US is a little bit different when you comparing to LatAm region. I agree with Ming, that LatAm is similar. We have, lots of countries, and it's very hard to, to consolidate, suppliers and also to have one strategy covering all Latin America. Yeah, it's very hard. It's very hard. It's not impossible, but it's very hard to consolidate.
Okay, and then I come to Andy. Andy, we know, of course, that you have quite a lot of experience when it comes to international and global fleet management. Based on your experience, what are the key success factors for designing a global fleet strategy?
I think when you're designing a strategy, you've got to sort of align it to what the wider corporate priorities are. I think if you don't do that, then when you're engaging with your stakeholders at a regional or a country level, then you risk just not being on the same page as them. So I think that's the first thing. So you've got to make your strategy relevant to them. But I think both what Ming and Tania have said is very relevant, which is, you cannot treat this as a one-size-fits-all approach. So have a strategy, but have a strategy considering the realities of the regions and the countries where you want to implement that strategy, and allow them to actually adopt the strategy in a different way that is bringing value to the strategy, but also is realistic for them as well. So I think it's really important that you have that understanding of the markets and the regions you're operating in.
How long did it take you to understand each and every region, Andy?
I don't think I still know it now, Stephen. I think the challenge is, you can't know intimately whether it's 60 countries or 120 countries. You just cannot understand that. You can have an overview of a region and you can have a broad understanding of the market, but you have to rely on the people on the ground, or if you've got regional teams, the regional expertise, and also your suppliers as well. So, you cannot, well, maybe it's just me, but certainly I don't think, generally anyone can hope to have that full overview and understanding of every country and every region.
Okay. Tania, you are working for a multinational company. I can imagine that there are also global guidelines in terms of fleet that were defined. What can you tell us about the success factors of good stakeholder management and communication between global, regional, and local stakeholders?
Yeah, it's necessary, as Andy was saying, when you have a big countries, lots of different situations, economic situations, needs, supplier market. I agree that you need to have a global directive framework, with rules and guidelines, to support the region. And I think that if you have that, this will be, very good tool, information for them to decide what is the best for each region. And I agree as well that if you have gained the trust from the stakeholders since the beginning in providing all the information to them, I think that they can, be very well aligned with us, and they can commit, for the implementation of fleet management in their country, even if it is a small or big country. But I am sure that with the framework, global framework, this helps the region to take the right decision. And communication is very key. When you have the involvement from the fleet managers from each country, and they know this framework, and we can provide all the information, I think this contributes to the success of fleet management in each country.
Ming, what could be the main pitfall that fleet managers could have when they are going to roll out a global strategy?
Yep. So I would say one of the pitfalls, and I think it was also alluded a little bit early, is that we can't have the one-size-fits-all approach, because obviously what might actually work in Europe might not work in Asia, and it could be very different from Africa. So that's one of the things I would say is the pitfall. The other thing as well is in terms of the involvement. So it can also be a pitfall, because if you don't involve your stakeholders at the start of the journey, you probably are going to get a lot of pushback. So what Andy and Tania said were great. Just one thing to add, and this is something which I personally learned through my journey in this role, was make your stakeholders feel part of the whole journey. So ask them and tell them, hey, we're going to be rolling out this policy or recommendation. Can you tell us what are your challenges you face in your market? What is the process? And make it as if like it's a journey together with them, and not kind of telling them at the end of the road, you need to just accept these vehicles which we're giving to you. Ask them, get them to be part of that whole journey. Then essentially you would have a much more successful chance in implementing what you're trying to do.
Okay. I would like to know from Andy, you have a fleet in I don't know how many countries, and probably you have fleets in much more countries than most of your suppliers are present in. How frustrating is it that there is not one supplier that can serve you really globally, wherever you are, with the required service level agreements?
I think at one level it is frustrating, but it's a very big ask of a supplier to be everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think the other thing is it's a very big ask of a supplier to be good everywhere. And I think that's the reality is, it's no good having a supplier that is everywhere, but is just average everywhere. We need to have the best suppliers to deliver the best solutions and the best services in markets. So if that means that we have to have more of a regional approach, that's fine by me. What I don't want to see is a completely fragmented marketplace. And obviously that makes the supplier management and the alignment of a strategy very difficult. But I think it's manageable at a regional level to have, different suppliers in different regions. And if that makes them better suppliers, then that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Ming, do you fear that a consolidation of the supplier market with leasing companies, fleet management companies, but perhaps also OEMs, will make it more challenging for you, or will that make it easier for you? Challenging because yes, you have less choice. Yes, there is less competition, and easier because there can be perhaps economies of scale, and there can be much more power from your suppliers.
Yeah, so that's actually a very interesting question. To be honest, and we're actually seeing this with this now. For the OEMs, we've seen it in the last couple of years, and for the leasing companies, there's been quite a lot of news about the big players looking at consolidating. So I would say the way I would answer this question is it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. So when I say that, it's both good and bad. Like you mentioned, yes, it will be more challenging because you're taking out a big equation or a competition, and then therefore you have reduced options. And what I've seen, at least in my markets, is that when there's not much competition, the incumbent supplier, the current supplier, becomes more complacent over time, and they don't offer the best products, or their service levels or pricing start to slide. So that's one of the challenge. If you look at it on the opposite side, I would say you are correct. If they do consolidate, it does make them larger. It makes them a stronger supplier, and it also provides more opportunity for single account management, improve volume consolidation, and easy ways of working. So it depends on which side of it you look at, but there are benefits and there are pros and cons to both of them. Yeah.
Tania, what would be your tip to your peers in terms of ensuring competition? How can you, as a global fleet manager, make sure that there is competition?
I think that, you know, when you have very truly global partners, you know, very good strategic suppliers, not only one, but more than one, maybe 2 or 3 strategic suppliers, I think that this is good for you, you know, to assure that you have, you know, fair competition. Even though sometimes they are not present in all countries, but I think that we, you know, we have very good guidelines and very good, I would say, global negotiations, even for FMCs or OEMs, that we can support the majority of the countries. And just, you know, to add what Ming was saying in terms of, you know, this consolidation in the market, I see a very good opportunity, you know, very good opportunity for innovation, saying that if we have strategic suppliers, but now they are consolidating, being more strong, even now that we are going to the electrification direction, I think this is a great opportunity for more innovation, more new offers, an opportunity, because they will be more stronger and they then can support us, you know, strongly in our mission, in our goals and objectives for electrification.
Andy, when talking about global fleet management and the benefits of global fleet management, one of the first things that comes to mind is, of course, that there are benefits in terms of economies of scale, process harmonization, supplier consolidation, and so on. Next to that, do you see, for example, that also globally items like sustainability, fleet electrification, employee mobility are becoming more and more important, or is that still regionally or even locally oriented?
I think from an AstraZeneca perspective, the desire to be carbon zero is a global objective. And so we need to adopt that at a global level. The reality, of course, is that the speed of adoption and the scale of adoption is going to vary by country, by region, because we know that there are clearly some significant differences in maturity of markets. I think that doesn't mean, though, that it has to be a barrier to adoption. And I think what you have to be is realistic with the markets, because if you go in there with that very sort of one-size-fits-all approach, as we've talked about, and you say, we need you to be EV tomorrow, and clearly that is just not a realistic proposition for them, then the risk is they do nothing, because it just feels like the goal is too unattainable. Mm-hmm. I think if you go in and say, look, we've got a desire to be carbon zero for fleet, and how are you going to get there? Let's build a roadmap together and let's go in stages. Then you have a great chance of success. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes back to what Ming was saying earlier, which is, you've got to work as a partnership with your stakeholders. So I think it's all possible. I think the frustration probably obviously with electrification is around the different levels of maturity, the different costs, the different regulations and fiscal rules and everything that goes with that, which makes doing a global strategy more challenging. I think on the mobility side, clearly that's a very fragmented marketplace, and trying to do anything beyond probably a broad sort of strategic overview of what mobility is and how it could be adopted becomes very difficult.
Mm-hmm. And Ming, also at Nestlé, I can imagine that you have clear carbon neutral targets. How is it translated into fleet, and what is your recommendation to fleet managers to set up, let's say, a green strategy across multiple countries, multiple regions?
Yep. So for Nestlé, I think it's very similar to all the big companies. We are essentially moving to net carbon or zero emissions. The group, just to give an idea, has set a goal of 2050 across. But specifically for car fleet, this part of it has actually been accelerated, and it's public knowledge that we have very high targets, and they've essentially said by the end of 2022, which is next year, we will be, I would say, majority of our fleet will be on green vehicles, and
Mhm.
any remaining emissions will be offset through like a internal carbon tax. So almost net zero. I guess to your second question in regards to how do you essentially do this,
Mhm.
and what's done. So I would say, and at least what's being done for my zone is, as you can imagine, in Asia, Oceania, and Africa, we've got a mixed bag of everything: developed markets, developing markets, problem with infrastructure, options, price points, too expensive, and all of that. So what essentially is being done is that we're doing a phased approach. For markets which we have options, we would try to move immediately into electric. If we can't do that, then we go the next level down, which is a plug-in hybrid. You would notice in most markets we can do plug-in hybrids, and you can actually aim for the management segment to do it, and that's something which we're moving quite fast. And then after that, you come to the hybrid section, and the hybrid section, majority of the sales guys can do it.
Mhm.
But I said again, depending on the countries and the markets. And then the final part, because I also manage Africa, if you
Mhm.
are not able to do any of the three above, then you look at vehicles which are lower carbon emissions when you actually do it. So from a CO2 point of view.
Okay, that's clear. Tanya, one of the issues that you are dealing with this year and probably also next year is the chip shortage. And so the immense delivery times of new vehicles. In what way is that an obstacle for fleet electrification and for achieving carbon neutrality? And what can you recommend to other fleet customers to do and try to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, it's very interesting question, by the way. Yes, we have been, working very strongly with our FMCs, in our OEMs, to have our orders in place. And we are, of course, facing these challenges, the shortage. But we continue with our goals and objectives on the electrification. And we are, as Ming was saying, also Genentech Roche has a very strong objectives on sustainability. But this will not affect us because we are right now on that, I would say, the phase of ordering lots of hybrids in electric cars at Roche Genentech, mainly in US. But also in Latin America, in Mexico. So we are increasing the hybrids one. Of course, this will take more time. It's impacting a little bit in terms of timing, but our objective is to have our 50 CO2 emission reduction until 2030, but we are pushing 2028. So I think that will impact us, this shortage, but we are going to persist in our partnership with our FMCs and also our OEMs, to make sure that we have our orders in place.
Andy, is there something that you can do as a global fleet manager or that you can recommend as a global fleet manager to your peers in tackling or handling that lack of supply of vehicles and how you can deal with it as a global fleet manager?
I don't think, unfortunately, in this occasion, scale doesn't necessarily get you any advantage, I don't think. I think everyone, the shortage applies to everybody. And I think in this situation, all you can do is be better at the planning and better at the execution. You've got to plan ahead. So the traditional sort of rules of sort of planning 6 or 9 months out probably have to go even further out. I think the opportunity here is that we're coming off the back of the pandemic, and clearly, it's still, well, we're not out of the woods yet, are we? But as we see things returning to normal, we have probably a fleet that has been underutilized for some time, and probably we have more room to maneuver with the existing fleet in terms of extending the cars, and hopefully that will give us an opportunity to sort of bridge the gap while this sort of chip shortage continues. And depending on who you talk to and whether it's the middle of 2022 or the end of 2022, hopefully we can bridge that gap And ultimately, it's just a delay. It doesn't stop us. It's just maybe just a slight delay, and we just have to work around that. So for us, it doesn't change our plans. It just means it's more challenging. I think on the positive side, if you listen to most manufacturers, the only good thing is that if you are adopting a very green strategy or a zero carbon strategy, then hopefully the availability of those vehicles is going to be better than if you were still pursuing an ICE strategy. So, you know, there's the small sort of glimmer of light in what's a pretty dark world at the moment.
Okay. Tania, what's on your to-do list next year?
Wow, next year we are going to continue in our electrification direction. So improving it, and in Latin America, more hybrid cars. So this is what we are going to continue in 2022. So very strong partnership with our strategic suppliers, you know, because you need to have all the pieces together, you know, for the electrification. So this is our plans for 2022, more focus on our electrification.
Good. Ming, what is your focus in 2022?
Yeah, it's quite similar to what Tania mentioned, but there's just on the other side, in regards to AOA, because I was mentioning earlier in terms of bringing the best practices, I believe that quite a lot of them has been done for some of the markets, and we're continuing this. So getting essentially templates which are standardized across the zone, getting suppliers to quote based on our specific quotation requirements. So that's all in it as well. But I think one of the main challenges also with the electrification is it's still ongoing, but ensuring that we can get supply of the vehicles, because in some cases, I can tell you in the markets, we're literally going to have to order 1 year in advance just to make sure that we have everything in place. So yeah, I think it's quite similar to the other guys as well.
Good.
But yeah, it's gonna be an interesting year next year.
Okay. And Andy, final word for you. What is your recommendation to the supplier industry for next year?
Focus on getting us the vehicles we need. So the right vehicles in the right place at the right time. I'd say that vehicles on their own are not the answer. If we're all wanting electrification, then infrastructure is the other critical enabler, and we have to develop that. We have to have, you know, workable solutions in every market. And so the suppliers, I know it's not the suppliers on their own that can do this, but they really have to help us here, because just putting the cars on the road is not going to be the only answer here. We've got to have the infrastructure to support them.
Okay, message well understood. Thank you very much to our panel, to Andy Leeden of AstraZeneca, Ming of Nestlé, and Tania Mijas of Genentech. Thank you for your time.